Hello and welcome to our webinar, Organised to Meet the Process Imperative. I'm Niamh Lordan, Head of Marketing at FlowForma, and I'm delighted to have you all with us today. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of some housekeeping and offer a few tips for participating today. Should you face any trouble logging into audio or have any other issues during the webinar, please email info@flowforma.com for support. Throughout the webinar, your lines will be muted. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions, and we'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and I'll share a copy of the recording with you all tomorrow. Okay, and now to introduce your speakers. So I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Koplowitz and Ross Cullen today. So Rob is a VP and Principal Analyst of Forrester, serving application development and delivery professionals. His research at Forrester focuses on digital process automation, as well as artificial intelligence and cognitive computing. I know Rob has some really interesting insights from his recent research to share with us all today. We're also joined by my colleague Ross, who is our digital adoption specialist here at FlowForma. Ross sits on our customer success team, and today he's going to share a few examples of how our customers are empowering their business users to become change agents. So that's our speakers. Rob, would you like to get started?
I would love to, Niamh, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who took the time to join us today. I think this is a really interesting topic, and I think this is really interesting from a timing perspective. And I know that the folks at Flowforma have been involved in this for a very long time. So I have three things I want to talk to you about today during the course of our next 20-25 minutes or so. And where we're going to go is we're going to talk about what I call the process imperative, and I think it's fair to say process and workflow are very, very hot, but they're hot against this backdrop of this massive need for automation, this massive hunger for automation. And we've been at this for a while, right? Flowforma is not a young company. They've been doing this for a long time. Lots of others have been doing it, and there's new technologies that are popping up onto the scene every day. So with that in mind, we're also going to talk about the technology challenge, which is really probably much more of a technology opportunity. There's a lot of technologies, and we're going to give you some guidelines for how you might think about applying those technologies to drive the most value. And then we'll leave with some recommendations. Please, as Niamh said, ask questions as you go along. We'll hit them probably at the end, but maybe peek a little bit at them in real time as they're coming in. So first off, let's start with this concept of the process imperative. In general, I think it's fair to say we haven't always loved process. We haven't always loved workflow, right? If you drop the term BPM to some people, you'll get a little bit of a PTSD reaction. Those projects, while incredibly valuable and potentially incredibly transformative, they were very large. They were very complex. They were very time consuming. They had a fairly high failure rate, a little higher than we would like, given the time and complexity. And so, we kind of shied away from process and workflow for a long time. We certainly began to shy away from the concepts around business process reengineering. If we go back to the old folks on the phone with us who will remember Michael Hammer and how we were all discussing those types of concepts way back when, that also fell into a little bit of disfavor, but none of that is the case now. Really, now we're at this point where folks are vitally interested in automation. The backdrop is around the data that you're seeing here, which is around digital business transformation. And if we ask folks in our research, what is the primary focus? What is the primary driver of your process improvement? There's a lot of things they're trying to do, right? So if you're out there trying to drive down costs, we're still driving down costs. We're still trying to drive better customer experiences. We're still trying to make employees more efficient. But the primary driver is very interesting. If we look a couple of years out, half of all process improvement initiatives are around driving digital transformation. And that's a very, very different thing to do. Because, if I go back to, even the most successful of those very, very large BPM projects, they often weren't transforming the business. They might have been transforming a piece of the business. You might have been better at onboarding a customer. You might have been better at handling a claim, but they weren't transforming the business. And they certainly weren't transforming lots of different types of businesses. As you go into where we're going to look at what's going on with some of the things that are going on in FlowForma, we're seeing some really, really interesting applications of digital transformation in some new industries where I think it's incredibly valuable. So with that in mind, things change, right? If you're trying to transform your business, a lot of things happen very differently. And as we look at this from a governance perspective and start to think about process diligence as the front end, the top of the funnel that drives this, there's a lot of things that we have to do. We have to be better at discovering how we work today. We're not very good at that. The truth is that most of us really don't know how our processes and our workflows work, and jumping to automation may not be the right answer. There's a lot of reasons we've done this in the past. Conformance has been a very, very big driver. I'm in a regulated industry. I need to do things in a certain way in order to conform. Still the case, still a major driver. But what happens as we move into this new world is we're trying to enhance experiences. We're trying to enhance employee experiences, customer experiences, citizen experiences, patient experiences in the case of healthcare, and we're doing a lot of it. So we need guidance on how to get there. What is it that we're trying to do, and how do we prioritize it? And so with the new research that Forrester is bringing out, and that we get to, you're actually among the first to see it, we've started to explore this model that says there is a logical series of steps that we see emerging as folks look at process and ultimately apply this to process automation. And there's some technologies that we'll make quick reference to here. So we need to discover what we're doing better. There's a lot of energy around the world of process mining and process analytics. We need to analyze things. Where are our processes breaking down? What are the friction points? Where do we have manual steps in the process that could be automated? Where do we have simply inefficient steps in the process? We need to start thinking about working together between process experts, automation experts, and the business, because these are the folks that are going to have to come together. And we start to see this huge focus around process documentation, better modeling capabilities, more collaborative modeling, and then the good old Six Sigmas, the good old process experts that felt a little bit like maybe that's a little too much overhead that we're carrying. Absolutely not the case. The process experts that are allowing us to understand how processes should run and re-engineer them in anticipation of automating them. These things all come together. But what's different, I think, than the good old BPM days is that we're continually doing this over and over again. We repeat the process continually as we're trying to hone and become more and more like software automation companies and less like our traditional businesses. And the model that we see that's really different in terms of how we approach this and the tools that are required that are different is used to be like turning the big aircraft carrier. The big classic BPM project was like turning the aircraft carrier. You brought in 50 consultants. They were expensive, and the results were great, right? We really did have some amazing wins. But the challenge in front of us now is, if we really are aligned around digital transformation, if we're really aligned around transforming our business to become digital, then everything is becoming digital. All of the things that were flying around on paper, where you had spreadsheets, running macros, you passed it to the next person, all of that stuff is in the process of being beaten out of your organizations. And you have to do that in a very consistent way. And it's more like turning a bunch of speedboats in unison than it is like those big bang projects of past. We're still going to do those big bang projects, but if you're going to transform, you have to think about your business and the role of all the people in your business in driving change in a very different way. So So one of the things that we look at very carefully in terms of what are the drivers, a lot of the drivers end up being this concept of the customer journey. And again, customer journey is a proxy here. It can be a patient journey, it can be a citizen journey, it can be an employee journey. But as we look at this, what we see is that there are these two disconnected components in our organization. We have people that are looking at the journey, and for the process professional and automation people who are on the phone with us today, which I'm thinking is probably most of us, we think we understand what they do. We don't really understand what they do, right? So they think about somebody that gets up in the morning and receives a statement in the mail, and they think about things like what kind of a mood is this person in, how did they sleep. There's all these kind of concepts that they work on that are very, very important, but really truly are not what we do. But what we do is we come in and we say, we'll get this little piece of it where there's this area where we can look at automation, and it's not incredibly complicated automation, but Steve in this example, who gets up and receives something in the mail, he goes out and he looks for his customer service number. He's got to pull a piece of paper and he's got to get that information out. He calls customer service. He sits there on hold. If we as automation professionals and process professionals really truly understand what's happening, in those three boxes, that's an area where process improvement and potentially automation can make that disappear. When I talk to the customer experience professionals, they look at those three boxes and they say, when Steve sits on hold for 30 minutes and doesn't have the information at his fingertips, he hangs up and goes to the competition. And we look at that and say, he doesn't have to do any of this. We can take all that drain out. So there is this really virtuous relationship, I think, that works between all of these folks who are focused on journey, and there's a lot of them. You see them all over your organization. They're the guys in the conference room with the butcher block paper, putting up all the Post-it notes, and we're the folks out there in a different room using modeling tools. So with that in mind, there is also this technology challenge and opportunity that we have emerging, and a reason I call it a challenge and an opportunity is because there's a lot of different pieces that are going to come together. So if I think about what's happening in across the entirety of my automation efforts, I've got this stuff that's to the left of the red line, and I call it the IT zone, right? So within the IT zone, you know what this stuff is. This is your ERP systems. This is your CRM systems. This is those big BPM projects. These are the big things that IT focuses on, only some of which is helping us to transform, right? And then to the right, you have a whole bunch of technology at your fingertips, all of which could potentially be used to help drive automation. So we've got digital process automation. FlowForma sits, directly in that camp. We've got content. FlowForma is built on SharePoint, so it's probably highly aligned with your content strategy as well. We've got the concept of low code, which is that not only are we going to be building software faster, but there's probably new people that are participating in the development of that software. So it's not just your professional developers. You're not asking for an automation from IT getting put into a queue and never being served. We actually have the ability to serve that long tail of automation that's so vitally important to digital transformation. We've got RPA emerging, really powerful capabilities around robotic process automation, bots running on client-side software that are able to do the tasks that were previously tasks that were managed by humans. We've got decisioning, rules capabilities. We've got the application of AI. We've got potential areas like document generation that can automate things that were previously manual steps. But what we really have to do is take a step back and think of this in the context of what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve. Let's think about what that looks like before we jump into any automation solution. And maybe specifically one of the things that that I see that's going on in the market right now is a lot of energy around RPA. Very, very powerful technology. There's absolutely no doubt that I can apply bots and RPA to automate things that I was not able to automate before. I didn't have an API. I couldn't do the integration to the back-end system. I didn't have access to it, or IT told me it was too expensive or too complicated to drive that integration. Or it's just a multi-step process that, you know, involves multiple steps by a human being, and I'd like to actually codify that and do that in a more consistent way. These are powerful, powerful capabilities. However, what I'm hearing back from the market and back from our clients over and over again is, well, how is your automation initiative going? Well, we're trying to deploy, you know, 1,000 bots, and we're up to 300. I just don't understand how that applies to outcomes first and technology later, nor do I think that the goal of you know, necessarily deploying the most bots or even writing the most low-code software is a viable way of actually measuring your automation capabilities. You have to think about it in terms of outcomes. What are we trying to do? And among the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to automate and bring more and more things online. And with that in mind, each of these technologies starts to take on very, very complementary aspects. So if we look at this from, you know, the different types of emerging technologies and how this might affect a journey, an employee that's trying to get their job done, or a customer or a patient that's trying to interact with my organization, I've got these things that are emerging. I've got new interaction models. You know, I can potentially contact you through voice. I can potentially contact you through a chat interface. I don't have to log on to a system that's hard for me to understand. Maybe ultimately this is me in my kitchen talking to an Amazon or a Google device in order to get something done. You know, there's a lot of excitement about these new interaction models. I, as a process professional, don't really particularly care how the information comes in. I want it to come in the way that is easiest for the person who's interacting with the system, that it's the best interaction model for them, and these create new opportunities for us to interact in the system. Low-code automation is exploding, and it's really attacking that long tail of automation that we've not been able to do before. You know, the backup in IT, or, you know, the other model that happens around low-code, which is really, really important, is it involves the business user. So whether the business user is writing that code in, you know, in a tool like FlowForma, or sitting with an IT developer that's able to develop in FlowForma very quickly, but they're sitting side by side and iteratively developing. What we're doing with low code, which is really, really important, is we are tapping into the business expertise way more directly than we've ever been able to do it before. We might have these capabilities around rules and decisioning, right? I can build a very complex model that looks like a rule, or I can apply rules, conditional statements. If this is true, and this is true, and this is true, route it this way. If it's something else, route it in the other way. Then there were these classic stop points that we used to have that were the human-centric parts of the process, or as I mentioned before, maybe there's just no API available. Wow, is RPA really, really powerful in taking that, automating it, doing it faster, driving efficiency, but also, really importantly, having it happen in an automated way that keeps the process online. So if you're external to the process and you just want to know the status of it, that spot where it hits RPA was the classic wait state. Pending, we're waiting for a human to do something. Well, guess what? The bot will do it automatically, and it will move it to the next step. If you're trying to do something like onboard customers, and your threshold, your outcome that you're trying to drive to is to have higher levels of straight-through processing and onboarding, really, really interesting technology. And then everybody is working with AI to start to do new capabilities. I mentioned here in the parentheses here, fraud detection, right? Really, really interesting. You're onboarding things. You have to understand whether or not this person presents a fraud threat. You know, AI is actually really good at that. It's really good at identifying physical items through computer vision. It's increasingly getting really, really good at understanding content and being able to say, yes, this is the utility bill. This person is who they say they are. They live where they say they are. I don't need a human to determine this. Drive it straight through. And they all work together, but there is this piece that sits below the bottom. And I think this is where vendors like FlowForma become incredibly important, is that digital process automation that modeling environment, that orchestration environment, that ability to monitor all of these different technologies and drive and manage the process. This is non-trivial. This is hard stuff to do. So the connective fabric, the modeling and orchestration environment, we feel is the realm of the DPA vendor. And it is the job of the DPA vendor to actually start to integrate these technologies and to be able to drive consistency across the entirety of the experience. You know, we tried to build a simple outcome-driven model here. This is through a mapping and documentation tool. This would be the tool where, you know, the business and the IT and the process professionals could work together in a single environment to say, what does it look like? We're trying to onboard customers, and in this, you know, in this environment, we see the application of digital process automation. We do think that that is the appropriate backbone to drive most of your processes. But when I apply a CSR, there might be 6 or 7 different rules that I apply to choose which customer success rep this gets routed to. And I can apply rules there. And then I can embed things like artificial intelligence. Here we use the fraud detection example again. And then multiple steps that become automated through RPA. So what we ask then is to say, look at all of the different intelligent automation technologies that are available to you, and let's start to keep them in their own lanes. And with that in mind, you know, we built this simple model, this simple framework, where we have 2 different varieties of digital process automation, deep and wide. And deep is for your incredibly sophisticated products. You know, to put things in perspective, the old BPM vendors, the classic BPM vendors, tend to fall into this DPA wide space. But then we have this emerging class of vendors that say, you know, we're really aiming at doing the rest of your processes. We're really aimed at driving that long tail of processes, not automating 3 to 5 processes, but dozens or eventually what we think will be hundreds of processes across the entirety of the organization. The focus of these vendors, by the way, Flowformer falls into this second column right here, or this second row right here, DPA wide. The focus of these vendors is simplicity of design, a cost point that allows you to deploy at very, very high scale, and then, of course, the ability to handle all of the technologies that sit below this. Things like dynamic case management. I have to be able to drive consistency in ad hoc types of environments as well. We see RPA emerging. Again, we think it's very important, but we think it needs to be kept in its own lane. And in these instances, we think there's an opportunity for it to complement DPA in a very compelling way. We've mentioned rules, we've mentioned decisioning capabilities. And then, you know, what we're tracking very carefully is investments in artificial intelligence. We think that's kind of what's out ahead of the headlights. But I would also throw in, not only is it out ahead of the headlights, but some of the most pragmatic applications of artificial intelligence are happening in process automation because we understand the business outcomes. We understand that we're trying to drive straight through automation directly in support of a business outcome. So think about developing a governance model that keeps these technologies in their own lanes, and think about applying these outcomes as your measure. Now, the next piece I want to talk about is this concept of the rogue developer. And I think this is a little bit controversial in the sense that we don't like to be told what to do. We don't want to have centralization. We don't want to have standards. We kind of push back on that. Oh, don't tell me what to use. My department uses what we use, and we're happy with it. So don't bring your architects and your standards people in and push us around. Well, okay, I got it. All right, I'm with you. Nobody wants to be told what to do, and you probably can move faster if you choose your own tools. The problem is that we think that we really have to move to managed platforms around this. We really have to do this in a consistent way. If we're really going to do a lot of software development in support of common objectives and common business outcomes, we have to start thinking about this in terms of the things that are going on in finance are happening on the same platform as the things that are going on in logistics, that are going on in supply chain, that are going on in customer service. Why do I need that? Because the process crosses multiple boundaries, and we've mentioned multiple times, We want to pull our business users in. Well, guess what? Pulling your business users in is going to require, you know, common approaches to training, common approaches to change management. You know, the old folks on the phone will remember we did this around email, we did it around spreadsheets, and I think it's time to start thinking about doing it around low code as well. There's a lot of people that are involved in this. We've been focusing on kind of the top piece. Govern your technology, do that centrally. Think about centrally managing this from a technology perspective. You have central skills that understand how to apply the technology, central skills that understand the importance of process and process diligence and process excellence, and then those business experts that get pulled into the process in a much more deep and compelling way than we've ever done before. So the foundation of this touches are going to touch all parts of your business. And it's really important to kind of think about this as a continuous cycle. It starts with understanding your processes. You need to collaborate on that business process re-engineering capability. You need to automate where appropriate. I know we're sitting here thinking about automation, but one of the things we have to think about is not everything is going to be ripe for automation, but there's an awful lot of stuff that's ripe for automation. You have to prioritize. Oh, wow, that jumped ahead like 10 clicks. Sorry about that, guys. You have to prioritize with strategic objectives in mind. And then think about that concept of the journey and customer experience, and you're repeating it. It's happening over and over again. Just leaving with a few recommendations before we pass over to Ross. Think about centralizing how you think about process improvement and routinizing that for scale. How do we think about doing this a lot more than we've ever done it before? I'll bang this drum one more time. Automate for outcomes, not just for the sake of automation. What are you trying to do? What is it that you're really trying to achieve? I'm going to pass to Ross here in just a few seconds. He's going to give some really, really pointed examples that are very, very much outcome based in terms of what you're trying to achieve, none of which are going to lead with automation. And then this new class of developers, your business people, they're thinking about driving the automation strategy of your company. It's probably not their job today, but it probably needs to be their job pretty soon. And then lastly, centralization, standardization, thinking about a centralized model for technology governance that allows you to do this at scale. We really think it's time to start thinking about standardizing on technology so that you can routinize it for scale. So thanks, everybody. I'm going to pass it over to Ross, and Ross has some really great case studies. I love them.
Thanks, Rob. It's very interesting research out there. And so a part of my job here in FlowForma as a digital adoption specialist is to reach out to our clients and to see how they're getting on with FlowForma and what their plans are for the future, and then to see how I can help them get from where they are to where they need to be. Let me just fix my slides here. So today I'm going to take us through a couple of examples to see how our customers are empowering their business users to become those change agents that you talked about. So you'd shown a slide that details that typically what we see is that IT will be in charge of very few highly complex apps and like ERP systems. But what we're really looking to achieve is to automate as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And a huge part of this is getting the automation work into the hands of those business users, because they're the ones that really understand the process, what the pitfalls are, what things often get overlooked. So now, of course, you're still going to want to have IT in control and aware of everything that's happening. But if you can leave the development of these processes to the process owners, it's going to massively increase the efficiency that they can be rolled out, and also the accuracy in what those apps are doing. So a huge benefit in Flowformer process automation is that it's a completely no-code solution. So the business users don't need to have any programming experience at all. And typically how this works is that IT are still going to be at the top governing this, but they'll be providing sandboxes to the users. So then they'll have a safe area that they can play around in and develop those apps away from the production environments. And once they're happy with something that they've built, they can make a simple request to IT. And then IT will be able to read that and see, oh, you want to move this process into this side? Yeah, that's fine, I approve it. And then all that migration stuff happens behind the scenes by the system. They can do the same if they need to, provide a new sandbox for users. So if you get a new employee and you want to give them something, you don't have to spend hours setting up a new site. You just say, need to set up a new sandbox under this site collection, approve it, and away it goes. And again, that all happens with no code. So I'm going to take you through a couple of examples here now to highlight how a few of our customers have done this. The first one we have is Beaumont. So you mentioned earlier that the process automation supports the customer experience. So I wanted to start by sharing how Beaumont Hospital have done this. Beaumont is a hospital here in Ireland, and they have 4,000 staff, 820 beds, and like many state-funded hospitals, they're faced with the challenge of providing a high standard of care, but within financial constraints. So their IT director, or the director of ICT, Mark Graham, he was looking to get rid of the inefficient paper-based processes and to digitize them with the aim of improving customer care. So, they'd have doctors or nurses that are working with the patients in the hospital, and then they'd be taking notes, but then those notes would need to be accessed by the administration team in another part of the hospital. So then they'd end up running all over the place with bits of paper that they needed to treat their patients, and it was very time consuming. And it's much better if the doctors and nurses had access to that information immediately, so then they can focus more on what they've been trained to do. So what Beaumont had done is they got a small team of staff trained up in FlowForma, and they've managed to automate a numerous amount of processes spanning across 14 different operating or IT systems, and then 20 back office forms for HR processes and finance processes and things like that. And they were able to integrate FlowForma into some of their existing systems as well. So on some of the existing systems that they'd used, they implemented an e-form button. So then when they fill that in, they could click it, it would launch the FlowForma form, and they'd have all that information in that form ready to go. And this saves them a lot of time, so that usually takes about 30 seconds to complete. And they use it for processes like waiting lists. So if they're referring a patient from one center to another, they just have the patient record open, click the e-form, generates the form, and that's then immediately available in the other section of the hospital where that patient's being referred to. They have another process which I particularly like, which is around the theatre notes. So they'd have surgeons doing surgeries, and straight after the surgery, they need to document what happened. And they can put in details such as who the surgeon is, what operating room it was done in, any follow-up notes that need to be documented. So then by the time the patient returns to the ward, all that information would be immediately available for the nurses. So then they wouldn't have to go around again looking for bits of information to know what medicine they need to give and how often they need to check in on the patient, things like that. Which again, that process only takes about 2 minutes to complete. And it also generates a summary PDF file that's then held in a document repository that's attached to the patient record. So if that patient came into the hospital at a later date or in a couple of years, everything's then documented and made available immediately. So the electronic forms, the doctors find them a lot easier to fill out, and it frees up a lot of their time, so that kind of saying they can focus more on the patient care and not filling in paper forms. And so what Beaumont are looking to do now over the course of the next 10 years is a digitization process that focuses on incremental improvements and not just replacing the paper forms. So it'd be very easy to get stuck into just taking your paper-based form as it is, making an exact replica and carrying on. But when new technologies arise, it gives us an opportunity to see what other functionality it will allow us to implement that wouldn't be possible with just a paper form.
Hey, Ross, can I jump in? Because I love this one.
Sure.
So for the folks on the phone, I get excited about this one because I had a chance to meet with the folks that drove this and to do some case study work on this from our side. And I think it's worth just kind of pointing out, like, the two things that I think were unique in my perspective, or really powerful in my perspective from Beaumont, were this was all about, as in their terminology, the white coats, right? Yeah. Enabling the white coats to focus on patient outcomes. And then the other piece I think that was so powerful on this was it came from the executive suite. So, it was a CEO saying, this is what we need. By the way, these are the outcomes. I'm giving you the freedom to go out and figure out how to do it. But it's about patients, Yeah, so I think I was
Yeah,
great.
so they
That's
had that
great.
sponsorship internally,
Yeah,
really helped push things along.
yeah, and 100% outcome based in terms of what they were trying to achieve. So fantastic story.
Excellent. So we'll have a look at another example here. So you'd also mentioned the importance of getting your organization set up for success. So in this example, we're talking about Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, which is the oldest school of tropical medicine in the world, and they have hundreds of staff working all over the world. So they had a huge demand for electronic workflows, and they'd made a decision to become a cloud-first organization using Microsoft technologies. But they had limited resources able to create electronic workflows and found that outsourcing was too expensive. So then when they found Flowforma, it was like finding a missing piece to a jigsaw puzzle that they had previous difficulty finding, because then Flowforma sits on top of SharePoint. So all the content and the working environment that they're used to stayed the same. So what they done again, similar to Beaumont, is they had a couple of staff trained up in the beginning, and then they were able to get their first 2 processes live within the first month, and then went on to create over 120 more processes. So again, it goes back to what you were saying, where you don't want to have a very few amount of highly complex apps. You want to get as much as you can automated. So I think for them being able to go from having limited resources, not wanting to, outsource to expensive third-party providers, to them being able to roll out 120 processes, it's a really encouraging story there, I think. And we're able to do this because what they'd found is that once they delivered a couple of high-profile wins, everyone started to think about their own practices and how they could then use Flowformer to digitize and improve it. So once people had seen what was possible, it kind of sparked the interest there for them to think about it for their own work. So they have processes that include things like finance processes for bank transfers and requesting currency exchanges, but they have a really important one around travel requests. So they'd send staff all around the world to countries that would have an outbreak, an infection or a disease. And what they want to do is make sure that the staff really understood the risks in going to those countries. So if they needed to go there to do research or provide interventions, they wanted to make sure that they knew what was going on, they understood the risks, they got the appropriate level of sign-off. And previously, before using Flowformer, they had 4 paper-based forms for this process. And that includes a lot of duplication of information. So you'd be filling out your name and your contract details across all of them. But if you have that information already stored, you can reuse it in your forms, or if you can bulk it all into the one form. Yeah, so that was a key objective for them. So they were looking to remove that inefficiency and to have their staff spending more of their time on providing customer care and less on filling out forms. So again, they aimed at not just replicating the paper-based forms, but using the flexibility in Flowforma to improve them over time. And they found that when departments became more involved in that digitization process, they were able to get turned around a lot quicker because the business users knew what they were trying to achieve and there was less back and forth, and they were able to get what they wanted, not what someone else thought they wanted. So again, I think that's a really good success. Then the next example is Abington and Whitney College. So I think this links up with your point about automating for outcomes. So they're a college or an institute for further education in the UK with 14,000 students, and they have campuses across 3 different locations and then 6 additional satellite sites. So they had a really disjointed environment, and again, if everything was being done on paper, it was really difficult and time consuming for people to get access to the records that they needed. So again, they're faced with that issue of the inefficiency and visibility of what's happening. And they also had sponsorship. So their finance director, Mark, he previously worked in the commercial sector, and he was looking to emulate that seamless integration and that he became familiar with, but found very difficult to come across in the education world. And without that option of becoming deeply integrated with an ERP system or something like that, he was looking to fill the gaps between the different bespoke systems that the different campuses had used.
Hey Ross, can I ask a question?
Sure.
And I'm sorry to come out of left field. I hope it's okay.
No problem.
Ballpark the time and effort to build a solution like this. What does something like this take in terms of ballpark the number of resources and the number of development days we're looking at to get something like this live?
Yeah, so what Abington and Whitney had done is they gave it to two of their business users,
Yeah.
and they got together with a process improvement committee, and they were able to get these processes up and running in, I think, maybe a month, maybe 2 months. So it's very, very quickly. So they had worked. We have an onboarding program where you can work with an analyst, and they'd help you get that set up and running for your first process. So the Sure Start program is 5 days. So you could get up and running with your first process in about 5 days.
But 2 months is really fast. We're really talking about kind of, and the number of resources, and by the way, the profile, the persona of the resources, also being very important. But these are significant outcomes, and this is happening really quickly. So it's worth noting that when you start to think about doing these things at scale, these are the type of efficiencies that you have to see. So thanks for answering that.
Yeah, so it's in there that they got together with a process improvement committee, and what they done is they picked the processes that would have the most amount of time saved and money saved. And you can see in the example of the slides there, that adds up to over 5,000 hours saved. So if it does take a little bit of time to get up and running, I think the returns are, they speak for themselves, really. You're definitely going to get a good return of investment in that. So I can show you some of the process here. So one of the ones that they use is for a student update form. So you can imagine them being a college with 14,000 students. There's a lot of administration needed for maintaining the student details, because student details are changing all the time. And whether it's just, they moved house or they got a new phone number, or they wanted to change courses and enroll in a different course. So this being done on a paper-based form was really difficult for them. They'd end up, losing things would be delayed. You have different versioning history, so you don't know which the record's the most up to date. So they were able to automate that using FlowForma. So what they'd also found in this is that, again, it goes back to reusing data. So if you have student records on file, you can bring in that information into your forms automatically. So all the student has to do for this is input their student ID number, and then the rest of that information is automatically populated for them. And then they can just focus on changing the few things that they need to change. They also have a trips and visits process. So again, being a college, they'd often go on field trips with the students. And again, they needed to do proper risk assessment and get approval for this. So they use Flowformer to do that, and then what they were able to do is to connect that data into a reporting tool like Power BI, and then they could have a real-time dashboard so they know exactly where all their staff and all their students are. They can kind of see what's happening on that day or an upcoming trip so that they can make sure they're prepared for it. Then the last example I have here is for Nipro. So they done exactly what you were talking about earlier, or what you recommended earlier about engaging a new class of developer. So Nipro, they're a large Japanese multinational organization with 20,000 staff worldwide, and they create medical devices. And what they were looking for is a solution that could be championed by the business users. So we seen earlier that it was really important, and it really led to success if you had sponsorship by someone like a director or the CEO or something like that, really pushing for this. And that's exactly what Nipro were looking for. They were looking for something that they could champion themselves. So they wanted to bring that responsibility in creating these automated workflows back into the business, so they didn't have to outsource, they weren't relying on third-party apps. So they had a requirement that the automation tool sat on top of SharePoint, but also that it would be mobile accessible. So, which worked out really great because we have a mobile app for Android and iOS. So then what they were looking to do with that is they'd go for staff meetings with their clients, and they'd be able to take notes and get the feedback from their clients and document everything in the forms. And it's also really useful if you have staff that are doing site inspections and they might be out in the middle of nowhere with no internet connection. So then they can use that app to capture all of the information. They can save the initial entry, and then when they're back with a connection, they can then submit it. So for those of you on the webinar who may not be familiar with Flowforma, Flowforma is an award-winning provider for process automation. We've been recognized for revolutionizing the traditional BPM space with our no-code logic-only process automation tool. We're globally recognized. We've over 200,000 users. We've gotten multiple Microsoft Community Awards and placements in the Forrester Wave. And so I've gone through a couple of examples for use cases that align with Rob's research, but you can see here there's many other clients here, and that they span a huge range in different sectors, whether it's the oil and gas industry, healthcare, construction, education. So it really can be, it's that DPA-wide tool that Rob mentioned, that it really can be used for a wide range of applications. So what I'll do now is hand it back over to Neve.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, so thanks Ross and Rob for their fantastic case studies and tips today. They were really insightful. I'm sure the audience have really enjoyed them. And before we move to Q&A, I just wanted to remind the listeners just of some recommended next steps here. So if you're interested in learning more detail on the case studies that Ross presented today, they're all available on our website, and actually they're in the handout section of the webinar panel there too. The report that Rob presented at the start, so advanced process automation by keeping the technologies in their own lanes, that's also available in the handout and on flowforma.com/learn. And then for all attendees today, you're welcome to try out the Flowforma process automation tool with a 30-day trial, and you can do that on our website. On the homepage. So that's some recommended next steps. So what we'll do now is we'll move to a few questions. So I know some questions have already come in, but if you have some last minute burning questions that you want to ask, please pop them in the panel. Just to make it confusing, the first question I have here is from Robert, and I think, Rob, I'll put this question to you.
Okay.
Robert is just asking, how can we get the right buy-in from the business to invest in digital transformation, from a strategic perspective, and how can we keep that on the continuous improvement strategy?
Mm-hmm. Well, so Robert, thank you for asking the absolute hardest question, and the one that I'm really grappling with. So in 2020, a lot of my research is going to be focused on how we drive change management, and I will often kind of say, the technology part is a lot easier than the sociology part, and I think what we're finding is a pattern. I suspect Flowforma is seeing this as well. Is thing number one. When the tools are made available, you will have a handful, a percentage of frisky users that are going to say, this is really great. I've been doing this on a spreadsheet and emailing it, and it's fundamentally, inefficient, and now I can bring that online. Boy, I can't wait. And we have all these, these studies of people who get up and they go to the coffee shop in the morning, and they work for 2 hours before they start their day job building code. You have the second class of folks who I think are again among sort of your frisky users who say, I put this into IT years ago, and it's been sort of sitting there in the backlog, and they've never gone to it. Wow, is there a tool that I could get to it? But I don't want to overemphasize that group, because I think we get overexcited when we see the early adopters who tend to be the most motivated. And I do think in order to get this out to the entirety of the organization, we have research. I hate to sort of throw it out at this level, but we call it the CEO research that says you know, software automation and the results of software automation and the outcomes we're driving become increasingly the part of the entire business. And we think that low code and process automation fit into that well. But we do think that there has to be this perspective from the top of the organization that we're all trying to turn the boats in unison, and that there's going to be new tools that you have to get on board in using. This is not impossible to do, guys. I mean, we didn't use, you know, I remember people being hesitant to use email. I remember people, you know, using, you know, spreadsheets in the most simplistic ways, but becoming better and better at it. So part of it is the introduction to the tools. Part of it is, you know, is that training piece. The reason I emphasize standardization is because you can have common training on how to use the tools, where and how you would use the tools. But I also do think that there has to be this buy-in that says we're all doing this. And I want to be really clear. I'm on shaky ground here because I am not a change management expert, but I'm going to spend a lot of 2020 trying to learn from and engage change management experts to say, what is this going to have to look like? Because I think, you know, as I look at sort of this, you know, what I call the process imperative, I think it's incredibly important that we get this done. And we're starting to see some amount of best practices emerging, but I think we have a long way to go. And I think people like myself have a lot to learn in terms of how to help you all do it. So it's emerging. It's the biggest problem. Thanks for throwing it out, because I really do think it's what scares me the most.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. Okay, the next question here is from Maureen, and I might pass this to you, Ross. So Maureen is wondering, can the Flowformer process automation tool support us in enabling suppliers or customers to participate in our processes?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. It's a good question, and absolutely. So we have functionality that we call Flowform Engage, and it's exactly for that. It's allowing you to interact with external users. So the first example that comes to mind is for one of our clients that do e-vetting. So they would have the general public submit applications that they could then go off and get vetted by the Gardaí. So if they're working with kids or the elderly, they need to have that Garda vetting to do that. So Flowform Engage absolutely allows them to do that, and they'll be able to go in, submit those without a need for a login or credentials or anything like that. And for suppliers as well, the same concept could apply there. If you need to interact with them, they'd be able to get access to those forms and submit them. And then once they can be processed, you can reach back out to your suppliers. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks for that, Ross. Okay, maybe we can fit in one more question here. So Rob, I might put this one to you. So this is from Mike. So Mike is saying there's a real need in his business to automate processes. It's quite daunting, he says. And he just wants to know, do you have any recommendations for where to start or how to prioritize? What can we achieve quickly, he's asking.
All right, so Mike, here's you know, maybe it's easier said than done. There is some burning outcome that you're trying to achieve right now, and the answer is go from 0 to 1. Right, that's sort of the big step. Find that one that is the right risk reward kind of you know, balance. You probably don't want it to be the most mission critical process in your organization, but one that is high value. You know, I think, you know, you know, as I pointed to maybe that customer journey map that says, you know, this is a pretty straightforward automation to pull a customer number from a system, be able to correlate it to a login that the user is has already provided to us, and be able to do a straight through process. That was a simple process for people to automate. It was very low risk and it was very high value. And then it became sort of that pilot that said, we did this really quickly, we did this really easily. And what was the business outcome? The business outcome was that the customer service people and the customer experience people were saying, when this stops and nobody knows what's going on, and the customer waits for 30 minutes, they hang up and they go to the competition. So we understood the business outcome. This is just an example, by the way. We understood the business outcome. We understood that we could automate it with the technology. We understood we could drive the change around it. And then let's go do another one. And then let's go do another one. There is, going back to Robert's question earlier, there is something that happens, which is viral adoption of this. We do, which is in our favor, right? So we do start to see that when someone sees, I can automate it and I can use that tool and I actually have access to that tool. I want to try that. I want to do that. Can IT give me a little bit of support? So, so like many of these types of webinar types of Q&As, start small, find something simple that you can get your arms around, prove that it works. And then, by the way, don't over polish it, right? Go fix something quickly and assume that part of what you're going to do is when you automate it, you're going to expand upon it. You're going to add additional functionality. You're going to make mistakes and redo some things. So don't be afraid to learn how the process will be better in automation through automating and learning. So that tends to be kind of the low code approach. That tends to be what we see over and over again. And then just to over answer the question entirely, the other model that we've seen that we love is to get all those, those people that say, I've got an idea, you've got some sort of, social kind of enterprise social platform where you can throw it out there to people that say, if you have an idea of what to automate, run a boot camp, as Ross described. Get everybody into a room, give them a couple of hours of button pushing, a training on how to use the tool, at least get them to be at a basic level proficient with understanding how the tool can be applied. And then do a little code fest, right? We have a great example of a manufacturing company in New England that did that. They brought a bunch of people into the room, and they ended up putting 5 or 6 applications over the next few weeks into production that handled simple problems. So there's a couple of ways that you can approach this. But again. Start small, get people excited about the possibilities that they didn't know existed before they knew these tools were available to them.
That's brilliant advice, Rob. Thanks very much. Okay, so we're coming very close up to our hour. So what I'd like to do now is thank everyone for watching. If you'd like to discuss further any of the trends, challenges or case studies that were discussed today, please drop us a line at info@flowforma.com. Lastly, I'd just like to let you know that at the end of this webinar, in a few seconds, you'll see a short survey that'll pop up, and I'd really appreciate if you could fill that out. So all I've left to say is thanks everyone for attending, and a special thanks to both Rob and Ross for sharing all your insights with us today. Thanks everyone.